Well, we're going to talk about the sod house today and Mother's relationship to a sod house. Mother was born in a sod house. I don't know whether you realize what a sod house is or not, but let me explain it to you. A sod house is a house literally made out of dirt. In Oklahoma, it's a clay-based soil, and when the settlers came here, there were so few trees they could not build log cabins, so they cut large chunks of earth out of the ground, the clay. They wet it down and made bricks out of it, but the bricks were 12 to 18 inches deep, thick, and large slabs, and they built houses with it, and they put it together with mud. Used mud for the cement and put them together. Then they put a thatched roof of some kind using tree limbs and scrap and straw and whatever they could find. If they brought any lumber with them at all, they used that for the roof and put whatever they could get for a rooftop. The problem with most of them had dirt floors to begin with, sometimes after they lived in them for a while. Yeah, that's a picture of the sod house that has been preserved by the state of Oklahoma. That was built in 1894. Now, that was the year Mother was built. Her sod house looked very much like that, and she got to visit that sod house while she was still alive and talked about the differences in the one she grew up in and that sod house. The Mother lived in that sod house for 6 years after she was born. It had 2 rooms. One room was the living area, and the other room was her parents' bedroom and the kitchen. It served as the parents' bedroom and the kitchen. They had a hole in the roof for the chimney where they could cook if they needed to when the weather was too bad to go outside. But most of their cooking was done outside because it was too dangerous. Fire was a real hazard and they could easily start a fire. So they tried to do their cooking outside. In the wintertime, now the sod houses were easy to heat and were cool in the summertime because these heavy slabs of earth kept the heat out and kept the cold out also. But living there was very trying because they had to put sheets on the ceiling and generally had sheets on the walls, interior of the walls, as much as they could because the bugs would crawl out of that dirt. And when it rained, it caused the bugs to come in even more. Little snakes, spiders, all kinds of things. And you had to do that at night especially, or all that stuff would come down on you when you were sleeping. Most of the people did not have bedsteads and mattresses. They slept on pallets on the floor. Now, after they lived there a few years and got better established, then they eventually got some beds and perhaps had bedsteads. But in the beginning, they did not have many beds. Sometimes the parents had a bed, but the children generally slept on floors. Mother had 2 older sisters who were much older than she was and an older brother when she was born. And then the year that they moved into the house that her dad built on the 160 acres that they had established a residence on, her younger brother, Victor, was born. And they got to move into the house that year. But living in that sod house was an extremely interesting affair, and to see Mother go through the sod house that's located at Alene that the state has preserved. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to Alene and visit that sod house, you really should do that. It's quite interesting. They have built a tin barn around it to protect it. You just can't imagine how small it is And to think about a family of 5 or 6 living in such close quarters where everything they did was right there. And the first thing when these families would come in and take these land grants and set up housekeeping, they had to build a place to live, but then they also had to have a barn for their cattle and their crops. So the barn was the first thing they built. The barn was the most important thing that they built. Now, some families, when they built a barn, also built living quarters in the side of the barn and would live in one side of the barn. But Grandpa Sawyer didn't do that. He wanted his living quarters separate, so they stayed in the sod house until he could actually build a house. But he built a lovely barn. It had a loft and for the hay and was a large barn where he could keep the crops and the cows and all of that kind of thing. On the land that he got during the run, he had, there was a creek that ran through there, and it made for a very nice area. The house they built was a 5-room house. It had 2 bedrooms. That's dimmed out, son. It had 2 bedrooms, living room, which they called a parlor, and a kitchen dining area, and then another big closet on the back where it was kind of like a mud room.
Is that the picture you gave me earlier?
No, well, it may have been. There may have been one of that house in there. One of those houses in there was the Henderson farm. But the Sod House was indeed an interesting home. And to think about living with dirt walls, dirt floor. Now, by the time Mother was 4, they had put a wooden floor in her home, in their sod house, so that they could actually sweep the floor. And she said they were considered really rich because they had a dirt floor in their sod house. And all of them had dug a cave by then because they had so many tornadoes and storms. They had to have a cave for shelter because even in those days they had tornadoes. And she talked about one time the tornado came and that when they went out, it had plucked all the feathers off of the neighbor lady's chickens. She talked another time about seeing straw run through a tree. But those were things that everybody talked about, but real damage could be done too. And there were more trees down around the creeks, but there weren't enough trees and they weren't of enough size in order to use for lumber of any kind. You still had to bring in lumber. The lumber had to be brought in from other areas. The bed bugs were a real problem in sod houses because bed bugs thrive on the soil and the different things that they come in from the soil on, and that was a real problem. And kerosene and turpentine are one of the things they used to get rid of bed bugs, but you had to be very careful with that stuff. So it was indeed a different lifestyle. And when you think about going to school, and the schools were very few and far between, and the children had to really struggle to get an education in those days. It was not an easy time because it was a whole new area. And everybody was building and trying to survive, and the kids would walk. Everything was horse and buggy or walking. And when we think about all of the nice things we have today, and the ease of transportation, and the ease of communication, and the televisions, and the cell phones, and all of that, people didn't have phones. They didn't have anything. We really don't know how well off we are. And we don't appreciate how well off we are. But Mother considered she had the best of all worlds because she got to live in all kinds of circumstances. And she figured it made her who she was, and she was so grateful for having lived during that time. A sod house, a house built out of dirt. So every time you folks have to clean house or run the vacuum or dust, think about that. Living in a house that's made totally out of dirt. How would you ever get it clean?
Okay, now before we go off, I'm going to put this back up here if I can get it in there. And I'm wanting you to try to give me an idea from this living room we're in. How much bigger than this room was the sod house? You're indicating of a small. Did it have more than one room? Or?
It had 2 rooms, but you could have put the whole sod house in this one room.
Wow.
And still had spare room. Okay?
Okay.
The whole house would have sat in here.
Mm-hmm.
That's how small it was. And it's just phenomenal that people could live in such a little bitty place.
Now, do you remember sod houses being around the countryside, or is this the only one you remember and the stories about them?
Actually, when I was a very young child, it was not uncommon to see the remnants of them. This is the only one I ever really remember seeing the whole thing. But the stories of them, because I grew up listening to Mother talk about the sod house she grew up in. But the stories of them you heard. But the remnants of them, you'd see the foundations and the places where they were, parts of them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the only one I ever really saw to see it. And it's furnished exactly like they were when they were there. Because when I took Mother, she went through it very carefully and pointed it out to me, all the different types of cooking utensils and everything they had, and the beds and all the stuff that they used. She said, this is exactly the way it was. Because Mother was 6 when they moved out, so she had a pretty good memory of it.
Mm-hmm. And where was that house located?
It was located 5 miles east of Helena.
Okay.
5 miles east of Helena, where Mother grew up.
Now, the house you grew up in, did it have sheetrock walls and insulation?
No, it had plaster. It had plaster.
So it had the slats of wood
slats
with
and
plaster.
plaster, right.
Was it insulated?
It was only with that, only with plaster.
There was no insulation on the wall?
No.
Was it a drafty house?
Of course. All the houses were drafty.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what insulation was at that point in time.
How did you heat that house?
We heated that with coal, wood and coal.
In a fireplace and a wood stove?
We had wood stoves.
And you put coal in there?
We put coal or wood in those wood stoves.
Where'd you buy the coal?
The trains would haul it in, and we'd go to town and buy it at the lumberyard. The co-op or the lumberyard.
And the wood you cut yourself?
And the woods, we would either buy railroad ties from the railroad when they'd take them out of the rail and replace them. We'd either buy the railroad ties there, or we'd go down in the pasture and where the storms had felled a tree, we'd drag a tree up and
you would
use
burn creosote-soaked railroad ties?
Oh, yes, and be grateful for them.
Wow.
Be grateful for them. We used to pay 50 cents a piece for them. Be grateful for them.
And how did you cut them up? By hand?
With an axe. We chopped them. We chopped them. It was tough.
Now, how big was that house?
We had, now square footage, I couldn't begin to tell you how many square feet it had, but we had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen. And it had 1 closet.
2 bedrooms?
In the front bedroom, 2 bedrooms. We had a closet in the front bedroom, and there was a pantry and a closet off of the kitchen.
Okay, and you had boys and girls and parents. Where'd they all sleep?
Well, the girls slept in the front bedroom off of the living room, and there was a vestibule. Do you know what a vestibule is? Mm-hmm. It's like an entry, okay? And then we had the back bedroom that was off of the dining room, and it was a long, slim room, and Mother and Dad slept in one end of it, and the boys slept in the other end of it. And the kitchen was a long, slim room.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dining room was a big room.
You forgot about the bathroom.
We didn't have a bathroom. The outhouse was located out south of the house. No bathroom.
South of the house, and the prevailing winds were out of the south?
That's right.
Oh, boy. So what about taking a bath?
We used a wash tub. Taking a bath was a wash tub.
And you bathed every day?
Galvanized wash tub. No, it was once a week. Only time we got a bath once a week was in the summertime, and then only if we had plenty of water. Because usually we didn't have plenty of water in the summertime, and we had to have water hauled. And my first recollection of what water cost was $2.50 a tank, and that was expensive.
$2.50?
$2.50 for a tank of water.
How big was the tank?
I don't have any idea.
But $2.50 was a lot of money.
$2.50 was a lot of money, and Dad would bellyache and complain forever about having to buy a tank of water. But we had to have water. If it didn't rain, we had to have water. We had a cistern, and our water was rainwater, and we had gutters on the house, and it came into a filtering system on the back porch, and it filtered through charcoal and went into the cistern.
Mm-hmm.
And about once every couple of years, the Dad would take a sample to the downtown to the county extension office, and they would test it for him to be sure it was pure enough to drink.
Mm-hmm.
Or whenever he thought there might be a problem, he'd take it down there and have it tested. And the county extension people at that time were very good to come through the area and help people with their testing of their soil or testing their water, whatever they thought they needed help with, because they were trying to upgrade, keep people from getting sick.
Trying to make us not a third world country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
About that. And
of course, we didn't have any electricity, so we had no sinks. We pumped that water out of that cistern by the bucket full. And at that time, we drank out of a dipper. We had a dipper in the kitchen in that bucket, and we drank out of a dipper. And yes, we shared a dipper.
Yeah. Yeah. So you all got sick at once.
I suppose.
Okay. What about a wind charger? Did you have a wind charger?
No, we did not have a wind charger.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have any electricity. What could a wind charger done for us?
Well, I was thinking you had a battery to listen to the radio.
We had a battery to listen to the radio. It was a car battery, but we didn't have any way to charge it up. We had to take it to town to have it charged up. And during the war, when we didn't have a car, and we didn't have a car during the war because our car had oversized tires, and they wouldn't let you buy oversized tires in the wintertime, so Dad put the car up on blocks. I mean, in the wartime. He put the car up on blocks. And so we had a horse, and we fixed the sling for the saddle to carry that battery to town with the horse and get it charged. And it'd take several hours to get the battery charged. Mm-hmm. And then we'd bring it back home, and then Dad could listen to the news. But all we were ever allowed to listen to on the radio was the news, because the battery was too expensive. As I recall, it was 50 or 75 cents to get the battery charged, and that was expensive. Money was very tight. Money was very tight. When we kids went to town, we were thrilled to have a penny. Because you could buy a whole pack of gum with a penny, so that was a good thing.
Well, that was all you needed was gum, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right.
All right, we need to